Hi, everybody. Welcome to the FitFam podcast. This is Doug, the formulator.
And Miss Olympia, Hillary. And as always, please, if you like our content, subscribe, hit the button below, and so you find out about the podcasts as they come out. And man, you're gonna want to watch this one.
Yeah, this one's gonna be really, really cool. Here's the truth about myself and Doug. I love this guy, and I love all of the information and the research that he's provided me over the decades of our marriage. But what I really love is when he finds others that have done the same research and back him up a little bit, you know? And so that's always fun for me.
Thanks. That's a nice way to say. I don't always believe them, but anyways, and I really love following the Think and Grow Rich concept of surrounding yourself with some of the best minds. And we were talking off air just a minute ago, and I love that the best minds don't have to be like the absolute authority in this area,
Oh, you
right?
know,
When I
I love
first got started, that's how it was. Like I need to find the world's leading authority in probiotics and in whole foods and vitamins and exercise physiology. In reality, you don't need to find like the world's greatest expert. You need to find people that are willing to do the work, and then they do the research and they're sharing with you. And that's one thing I just loved about our conversation a minute ago. But we'd like to welcome to the show, and hopefully more in the future. We're actually going to invite James to be on the documentary because I'm so
love it.
impressed with his investigative journalism. But James Lee, investigative journalist, done some phenomenal work in a lot of spaces, right? Not just in our world of health, but so impressed with your, not just your research, because we have a lot of researchers
Mhm.
that we deal with, and we wouldn't dare put them in front of the public because they're very good with the details and that, but they're not really good with being able to explain it and, simplify the research they've done. And I really love that you do both. So, man, welcome to the FitFam podcast, James. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Doug and Hillary, for having me on. And that was quite the intro. Like I said, I'm not necessarily, you alluded to this, not necessarily the expert in everything, but I do have, I think what's going for me is my curious mind and being willing to kind of dive into topics and question some of the information and be able to seek out other experts and folks who know what they're talking about and be able to try to distill this down to a bite-sized piece of information that people can consume, because I do understand that most people work for a living and they don't necessarily have hours and hours a day to look into different things. So I try to be honest with the audience when I do know something or I don't know something. So happy to dig into all kinds of different things with you guys today.
Yeah,
Well,
I love
absolutely.
that.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, how did you get into investigative journalism and just basically how it began?
Yeah. And then the one caveat I'll say is, yeah, I think investigative journalism is thrown on to a lot of folks. I think, yes, I do some investigative work, but also it's built on other people's investigations as well. Like I'm not necessarily always doing primary research. I'm sometimes connecting the dots, sort of looking at what's available publicly and saying, hey, are these two things related? Which I think a lot of times there's a maybe a deliberate obfuscation, you could say, that to say these two are unrelated things, but then to kind of connect the dots a little bit there. And to answer your question, how I got into this is kind of a long story, so I'll try to tell it in a a slightly shorter format here. Is that I was a management consultant, so I went through business school, graduated from New York University back in 2018. So I spent about 4.5 years as a consultant for Fortune 500 companies, and specifically, most of my clients were in big pharma. I had a number of big pharma clients, including some I mean, technically under NDA, so not allowed to say, but these companies, they're some of the largest. One is headquartered in New York. You can just do a little Google and see what's there. But what got me out of that really was working through COVID, right? I think COVID was a big awakening for a lot of people in terms of how business and public policy and government intersected, and how some of the interests really weren't in made in, sort of, I would say they were not made with the public's best interests in mind necessarily. And I got to see some of that going on behind the scenes. And I could share a little bit with you later about, some of the things that I saw. But that was when I started to really just do my own sort of research outside of work, on my own free time. And because one of the things about COVID that I thought was helpful is it really removed and split the work from some of the more, I would say, play aspects of the jobs. I don't know how much you know about the consulting industry, but we're traveling around all the time. I remember in 2019, this is the year before COVID, I spent 200 days on the road. So I was never
Wow.
home, and I was going around to all these manufacturing sites because that was kind of my specialty, was supply chain. So I was at a lot of these small towns, and I was always on the road. And when you're on the road, there are some good benefits that you get. You're eating at nice restaurants, you're staying at nice hotels, all these different things. But then all that stopped at the beginning of COVID, and I really got down and saw what the job was really about, which is, just about making sure that these big pharma companies profit continues to go up and up and up.
Mm.
And so it really opened my eyes, and I started looking into all kinds of stuff. And that's when I started basically doing my own stuff outside of that. And then it took me a couple more years to finally kind of leave. And that whole departure, I'll say, for maybe an offline conversation of how I was more or less, I said some things that I probably shouldn't have said in a pretty big meeting with some high up people of real thoughts. And that's what kind of happens is when you tell the truth in there, it's really not ideal for your career growth. But I'm happy. I've never been happier with where I am today in terms of, like, I wake up, I'm excited to dig into stuff and, hopefully create a more informed public, right? I think I'm a big believer in informed consent, right? A lot of these things, like, the public just needs to know about and be able to make the decision for themselves in how they want their body to interact with all different things in the world, right? Whether or not it's good or bad for you, you can make that choice. Like, I'm not really for outlawing anything. I'm more for transparency, shining light on it, right? Sunlight as the best disinfectant, right? Because I know you talk a lot, Doug, about alcohol being bad. I would kind of tend to agree with you on that, but I would leave it up to people to decide how they want to consume that particular product.
Yeah, then and that's a great point. And I think that it's one that many times people confuse with our stance on health
Yeah,
because
for sure.
being holistic, it does come down to choice. So like today, for example, red dye 3 got banned. And that's loosely for the amount of time they're giving them and everything to get it out of the foods. But if I was in the position, would I have banned red dye 3? That one's maybe close because there is carcinogenic factors with it and there's no benefit. But in reality, what would have I would have really pushed for is, look, you need to list, just like they do with tobacco and other things, black box label, warning that this is what this ingredient does, and then you can choose, right? And so, although I am a fan of some things being banned, really we stand more for that of if informed consent, but being truly able to be informed properly. And that's where a lot of this legislation and lobbying comes, is to stop the American public from being able to be informed on GMO and the processed foods and that. So, with you 100%, I think, should you pull alcohol and go prohibition? No, but you should be completely honest about the effects so that people can make a true informed decision. And I know, some of that even goes to the big companies and what they're lobbying to do so that you can see whether they're in it for just profit or they really care about people and stuff.
Yeah, no, I think we align perfectly because we're just all about transparency, right? Even in the bodybuilding world, where I'm a natural bodybuilder, and there's plenty of people that are enhanced bodybuilders, meaning they use PEDs or steroids to achieve the look that they want. And while we disagree with that methodology, we're okay if somebody is fully informed and that's what they choose to do, right?
Absolutely.
It's just about transparency and then also what they choose to do and then also what they choose to tell the public that they're doing. So
Well, and I know you want to get to a question really
we do.
quick, but just on that subject, thanks for being patient, James. Is this last weekend, I was at a mastermind and it was a millionaire mastermind. There had to be a certain amount of money that the people earned to be there. And um, I got on stage with a guy named Flex Lewis, who was a 7-time Olympia, right, champion and the best in the world, but in the other organization that's the Enhanced League. And afterwards, one of the guys came up and said, "Hey, how was it to be on stage? You, Mr. Natural." He used to have the name Drugless Douglas, right? Like the natural guy. with Flex. And I'm like, Flex is a great friend of ours, like
Yeah.
great friend. And, you know, we love each other. We love that we have the same passion. And we are great that we both chose different routes to go and support, but we still have the same passion and we can be very close and we respect each other. And one of the reasons we do respect him is that he has been open with, this is what I did to
Right.
achieve this.
Right.
And that's great then. So I really agree completely, but I'll let you get into the question.
Yeah, no, great point. But I want to get your feedback on one of the reels that I recently watched about Nestle and maternity leave, because you connected a lot of dots in that one. So kind of tell us what you found there.
Yeah, that's an interesting dig because I'm not the expert, so I would never comment on sort of the science behind all of these things, but I do try to look at issues from a financial or incentive perspective to say,
Mhm.
hey, this is what's going on, maybe. And with Nestle, what I looked at was their particular lobbying around maternity leave or against maternity leave, because I think one of the things about maternity leave is that it is a cost prohibitive, to the company in terms of the workforce. But another aspect too for them specifically is that they sell a lot of products that would benefit from people not being on maternity leave, specifically this debate of whether you should, breastfeed or formula feed newborns. And for me, that there's no particular, I don't know enough about the science behind all that stuff to say which is better or worse, but I do know from a historical evolutionary perspective, formula is a relatively new thing that we've introduced in the last,
Mhm.
50, 100 years, whereas breastfeeding has been around for, since the humans
Right.
were existed. So I do know that bit of history, but some of the things I looked at was a particular study that was from the Lancet that did find that, hey, if women were given maternity leave, they were more likely to continue breastfeeding versus women who did not have. I think they it was about 3 months of maternity leave. So there was a
Mhm.
difference in terms of the amount of, or in terms of what path they went down. And then you start looking at, okay, so what's the benefit? So obviously they're going to sell product, right? Because if you don't have to, if you have to go back to work, you're less likely to have the time to do the pump and all this other stuff.
Right.
And then you look at then I do look at the science a little bit, right? Then I look at the experts. What are they saying out there? And there's a lot of studies out there that show the positive benefits of breastfeeding. And you could say, this is where it's really difficult because there are other studies that say, oh, there's no difference, right? This is where they try to muddy the waters
Right.
with how they fund these studies. Some of them are funded by the companies themselves, some of are independent. So you really have to kind of be able to I don't know, wade through that kind of
Mhm.
mess
Yeah.
of a
You have to research your
yeah.
research.
Exactly. You have to say
Yeah.
who's funding the research. But there is a lot of research out there that say, hey, this is a potential issue. And it could cause not only, in terms of development of the baby, right then and there, but long-term effects that it's harder to measure down the road, right? You're talking about
Mhm.
things like more chronic diseases, obesity, these type of things that they haven't necessarily done this study, but there are shorter term studies that would suggest, hey, this is a potential issue
Right.
Right. In
down
fact,
the
let me
road.
just jump in there to even
Yeah.
help with that. From our standpoint, then, kind of in our world, next week we're going to have a couple hundred doctors in town for 4 days that we're going to train, and one of them is this subject: is the importance of encouraging breastfeeding with women. And there's some great new research coming out showing that one of the main reasons that you should breastfeed as long as possible versus going to formula, just to kind of set up this, is that we haven't found a way to supplement the human body to be able to get the microbiome, the friendly bacteria and the probiotics to be able to flourish, or what we call colonizing forming units properly, like the right species in the right areas. And that we do the best we can, but it works well when someone is grown and then we feed the body with fermented foods and probiotics, and that ecology is already set up. But the how it's set up in the body and when the body has a right microbiome is dependent on the breastfeeding we're finding out and how long they breastfeed, because there are certain factors in breast milk that no matter what, it's respecting God, respecting nature, we can't duplicate, nor should we think we can. We do the best we can with supplementation, right? But the food and the natural approach, straight from the earth or from the mom, is always better. So what the research shows is that the microbiome in the babies develop sooner. Their immune system is stronger. Their ability to fix what's called SNPs, the SNPs in your genetic chain, to fill those in, happen at a higher level, meaning it's helping you with long-term risk of disease. Your longevity factor on the DNA itself, we know that just for the length of the telomeres, all of these things are improved when the mother breastfeeds as long as possible versus formula. So I know you're walking lightly in, the research and being the person that knows for sure that. So I'm going to jump in and say we know for sure, just for the audience is listening right now, breastfeeding is way to go as long as possible, and then you feed the mom with the best whole foods and that so that it can develop. So let's assume, and because that's our stand on this, that absolutely breastfeeding as long as possible is the best thing for your health. Then where
Yeah,
does
to
this
build
come
off
in
of
Nestle?
that,
Yeah,
yeah, to build off of that, Doug, is then you get to the profit making machine, right? You're talking about these industrial complexes
Mhm.
where it is not necessarily bad to have maybe a large swath of the population need additional medication or supplements or programs down the road to combat some of these chronic issues that have
mhm,
developed because of the choices made early on in life. And if you notice the business model of Nestle, they not only sell the formula, but they also down the road, they also have their, obesity treatment programs. One of them is called OptiFast, where it's just like a food supplement type of thing where it supposedly helps you control your weight. But then you have to ask, well, why are these people overweight in the first place? And there's a lot of factors to why people become overweight,
Of
but
course.
certainly if you're not getting, newborns off to a good start in terms of what they're eating and what they're consuming, this could lead to issues. But for them, it's not really a problem because they're selling formula on one end, and at the other end, they're selling the solution to what maybe the formula has caused, or according to what you guys are talking about, that there's a linkage there. So here you go. And this is where I go, a little bit higher level discussion. And one of my favorite quotes is how you do business is how you do justice, or how we do business is how we do justice. So as a country, we have to decide whether or not we want to profit maximize in every single scenario. Because I mean, I'm generally for, making money. People should have the ability to innovate and
sure.
make money. But then what is the cost of that? So if the cost is your population becoming sicker and sicker, and then having the
Right.
country kind of rot from the inside out because of this kind of short-term profit making machine that we've built, is that really good if we're talking about, hey, is the goal to sustain America to 200, 300, 400, 1,000 years? Or is it just, hey, we're going to be a flash in the pan, a couple hundred years of dominance, and then we fade out and let some other country dominate or take over because we
Right.
weren't able to have that long-term view?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what did they lobby for? We're talking about the company that makes um, the formulas and that. And so they have that financial incentive you're talking about. What happened?
Well, so this has been going on for a long time in terms of their lobbying against maternity leave. And this is not only do they do this in the United States, but they've also done this, in other countries in Africa. And this is I'm not like the foremost expert in this, but I know what they've done over there is basically push a lot of this formula stuff, making people sick over there for this kind of short-term profit. But you can see this across the entire food industry is arguing for these types of things that don't make any sense, either against maternity leave or against minimum wage increases, just things that would necessarily make people have to work more and deprioritize health. And then they create a product to then help you later on down the line to do this. And this is where, when I do have to comment on in terms of the government, a lot of the issues comes from the fact that corporations are considered people and they can lobby and they have an extraordinary amount of power in swaying the lawmakers in this decision, because I think if you were to remove the money, right, they put in millions of dollars every single year into funding campaigns, right, either directly or
Right.
indirectly, right? There's a lot of ways to obfuscate where that money comes from. They can hire people. I know Nestle, um, they would argue that they don't outright lobby people, but they have created a lobby, or they've paid a lobby organization. So there's a degree of separation there. And that person, that lawyer, then goes on to
Mhm.
Capitol Hill and then lobbies the government, but not directly for Nestle. You'll never see their name in there. But if you trace the money, then it'll be tied back to that company. But this is kind of what happens. And so everything that they do. So my point is, if you remove this aspect from it, I would I would assume that the lawmakers would actually see this as, why wouldn't we want to be for families, for Americans, to build and to give to give American families a strong foundation, and
Mhm.
then they can contribute even more to the workforce. I think this is one of those things. The short term is outweighing the long-term priorities, what I would see as something that kind of built this nation to become a powerhouse. If you look back in the 50s and 60s, it was much more priority for the family, for workers, and just to build, the middle class, which is how we basically innovated everything. If you look at a lot of the innovation, it came from the middle class. It didn't come from necessarily the ultra rich people. It's people, like all of us. I know, it sounds like you, Doug, are in the upper echelons of wealth a little bit there with the club, but I think it came from people like us, where we want to do good and we're out there doing it. So I think that's the question I think we're gonna have to answer as a country, to see what direction we want to go in.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think just for the audience, what we're to give a little background for some people that are new to the podcast is that we're talking about big tobacco, right? Phillips Morris and them going in and starting to purchase food companies. And the largest one that started this whole ball game was the purchase of Nestle for billions of dollars, right? And they used them same marketing tactics from tobacco and smoking they were very successful. And they started using them with food. And that's
I thought it
why.
was Nabisco. I think it was Nabisco.
Oh, Nabisco, you're right. Was it Nestle? And the first one was Nabisco. Thank you for clarifying that. And so they're using these same tactics. And the problem is, like you said, it comes down to a moral issue when you're talking about health. There's nothing wrong about selling a widget and making billions and billions of dollars if you can off that widget, as long as that widget doesn't create a moral problem. It's causing, health issues down the road. Then you have another answer for it, kind of the pharmaceutical model. But what happened here is now you have a company, like you said, that's selling formulas, that's actively lobbying to try to get mothers back in the office sooner, because the research shows that they'll use more formula. And what is that moral code
Right.
with that? And do we have anything in this country to help with it, except for just the moral code that we all should be living by?
Right.
Right, and to piggyback off your point with the big tobacco, right? That's where the insidiousness comes from. It's really not about creating foods that make people healthy. It's about creating foods that make people buy more food, right?
Right.
I did another video talking about how they basically repositioned all those scientists from Philip Morris once they acquired the company, once they acquired the food company Nabisco, and they reassign them to go do research on the brain and all kinds of stuff, and how people's brains interact with different chemicals that they could put in food to make it more addictive and to make them
Right.
buy more, and not necessarily create foods that are satiating, but creating foods that you would want to buy more and more of, which is kind of wild in terms of, like, that's where it came from. And there were some conversations recently, or there was a lawsuit that came out recently. I'm sure you guys saw that documented that they knew this is exactly what was going on. It was well known within the industry that that was the plan, to say, hey, how do we create the next big tobacco, right? Because there
Right.
was a public movement against smoking. Once we found out smoking was bad for you, we don't want to do that anymore. And they're like, well, how do we create the next cigarette, basically? And food
Right.
became the next cigarette. And then they tried to figure out, okay, who is the best and most vulnerable people we can target, which then it became kids, right? They figure out, oh, if we just put all these cool colors and cartoons and all this stuff on the food and put it positioned it very low in the grocery aisle where it's at their eye level, then they would
Yeah.
go to their parents and say, "We want the tricks, or we want the Fruit Loops and all this stuff." Um, and and then it became sort of a capitalistic model where then other companies, right, would then, oh, we have to compete with Nabisco, so we need to do some of the similar tactics that they've now deployed on the population, and we're going to do the same, and then becomes kind of a race to the bottom, and that's from my experience as a consultant, this is kind of what we look at, right? We look at different ways. How do you gain an edge against your
Right.
competition? And this is more or less, if we optimize for just the shareholder profits, this is the inevitable solution, right? When we make all those PowerPoint slides, we don't really consider, the long term, hey, 20, 30 years down the road, are we going to have an explosion of chronic disease? Even if we know that, we won't really factor that into the decision making model.
Right. Right.
Absolutely. So, it kind of leads into the second thing you would like to talk about, and obviously would love to have you back again because there's so many things we put down we would like to discuss. But I think this leads into just a second topic for today, and that is about something called front groups. And
Mm,
I'm familiar with them, going way back in the early '90s, being very naive as to way this works, the things that you saw consulting for big pharma, and that uh, being in the position of not realizing that's how the game is played. I was called in to give a talk against the fluoridation of water at a big city in Arizona, and I'm like, oh, of course, here's the research. Like, it's not the good fluoride that they're putting in the water, right? It's this chemical, it's created from the plants and the waste product. And, we have a podcast on all this. So it's actually very detrimental for the human body. And the research is very, very strong on this. And so I went in to give this nice talk and to kind of inform this city,
Yeah, you
probably
thought
not.
you were there for transparency.
I thought I was there for transparency. That's a
Yeah.
really good point.
Right.
And to, here's the reason you guys should not vote for this, right? It's just a con job to get you to buy it, and they make all this money. And me just being the nutritionist for the Phoenix Suns, a nobody, right? Just this nutritionist they asked to come into the city, and do this talk. They had flown in, um, Big Pharma had flown in some lawyers to do nothing but heckle me during the talk. Oh, are you a medical doctor? Are you this? Are you that? And I was blown away of just how hard they were coming. And I'm like, this is crazy. This shouldn't even be a discussion. And that led me down to jump in that rabbit hole, right? To be like, okay, this is how the ball game's played, right? They're putting money into lobbyists and sending people not just to Washington, but everywhere to try to influence the cells of things, no matter whether they're healthy for you or not. In this case, it wasn't, right? The fluoridation water. But it led me into learning about what's called front groups. And most people don't know about front groups. Could you give us a little bit of information
yeah.
based on what you know?
Yes, absolutely. So front groups are basically it's an organization, and usually a nonprofit of some sort, that projects itself as an unbiased resource for either scientific or medical information. And one example that I could give is the American Council of Science and Health, right? Their thing, if you go to their website, it says promoting science and debunking junk since 1978. So that sounds really nice, right? That's
Right.
where news, this is the part where, so they pretended to be this unbiased source, and mainstream news will go in and they will cite the studies that they fund or the articles that they put out. But a lot of times those are just kind of PR pieces that have been funded by the industry. Because if you look into the funding of the ACSSH, which I've done, it's a lot of petroleum companies, it's Chevron, it's Big Food, it's Coca-Cola, all these types of companies. And they actually, and this is done, great work from, I have to shout them out, US Right to Know Group. They've done a whole, it was I think it was maybe 20, 30 links of just documents, hundreds and thousands of pages of PDFs, which I looked through. And there was actually some of the things that came out through their FOIA, was things like spreadsheets where they literally track, oh, the so and so group gave us money. And so what issue do they need help with? Okay, what are we going to do about it?
Wow.
And if the contracts came up, they're like, okay, how do we get these people to re-up the donations or whatnot? And what issues can we potentially help them with? And these kinds of things. And there was an email in there that I found that they said this was one of the senior lead scientists for Monsanto, and he said to his colleagues, like, "Hey, this is a good investment, quote unquote. You will not get a better value for your dollar than ACSH in terms of the return on what the publicity that you're going to be able to get." And so this is what we're talking about in terms of front groups, right? Because and then they all. One other thing is that then they'll sort of weaponize cultural flashpoint issues to bully people, right? One of the things that has been documented was that they would then team up with people. Let's say one of the documented cases was with the NAACP, and this is around sugar and Coca Cola, to say, hey, if you're a parent and you're not giving your kids Coca Cola, or if you're a parent that's out there advocating against giving your kids Coca-Cola, that's actually racist because these are the drinks that the minority groups like to drink. So you're actually being racist against
Wow.
these groups of people. And nobody really wants to be a racist. And that kind of just shuts down the conversation of what you can
Right.
have in public about, just trying to promote the truth about the effects of eating a lot of sugar. And so that's kind of what they'll do. I got into kind of a little tiff with a person from that I would say is involved with a different front group called the Genetic Literacy Project, which is like a big chemical front group. And this quote unquote scientist puts out all kinds of different. I mean, if you read the articles that she puts out as science, it'll be stuff like glyphosate is a low toxicity chemical, so we shouldn't really worry about that. Or she'll talk about ultra processed foods not being that dangerous and how we're blowing it out of proportion, or just industry talking points like moderation, or they will say, I mean, there is some truth in this, in that, okay, yes, what was it, the dose is the poison, something along those lines, which is,
Right.
yes, that's true, but we need to talk about whether or not these things need to be in there at all, right? Because she was referring to
Right.
specifically the dyes, which you brought up earlier, Doug, with the Red 3 being banned, or the announcement of Red 3 being banned today. And do we need to have this in the food? What's the positive impact of that on, health?
Right.
What dietary or nutritional value is Red 3 or Red 40 or Yellow 5? All these things, what is it providing? Oh, it's not providing any at all. So it's there to sell more food. Um, so
Yeah.
that's kind of these front groups. So it is becoming increasingly, as the disclosures coming out, which is interesting, then it becomes increasingly harder to track some of these front groups, because then they're getting smarter about obfuscating, the
Mhm.
the the
The
the
funding.
financial ties and such. Because one of the doctors who I called out, she was basically DMing me and threatening to sue me, saying, "Hey, I never got paid by so and so group. You can look for it. I never got paid by this and that." And I'm saying, yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe, but then you'll find out, oh, they actually invited her to do this talk at this big ag kind of, expo or convention type of thing. So
Right.
then that's a different organization that organizes that.
And paid an exuberant amount of money to
To do
speak, which
right, but
is
then
bad.
you don't trace directly from the front group to that. So the front group is one of the sponsors of this conference, but then the money
Mhm.
is, there's a little bit of a break in the money. So the conference itself invites the guests of the conference, of course. So
Right.
then it's like, oh, okay, well, I mean, we can kind of connect the dots there a little bit.
Absolutely. And so maybe we can kind of finish today with, hopefully this goes right. Well, I want to really blow up that conversation and help people understand what is, when they might be dealing with a front group or not. Because as you said, in the old days, it was pretty easy to trace the money back in that, because I'm not the greatest research in that area, but it was easy for me back in the 90s to trace the money to some of the front groups, then be like, look, this is a scam group that they're using. So it's not Pfizer attacking me and AMA attacking me, right? They're doing it through these front groups, and it's getting tougher now. But there are some things that you can look at. So I'm going to kind of lead into that with that story. Is in my situation, I had a lot of front groups attacking me when I said we're going to help holistic health professionals be able to teach patients how to improve their lifestyle. because lifestyle is one of the major causes of disease today. So teaching doctors how to better teach whole food nutrition, exercise, whole food supplements if needed based on testing, right? Not just throwing a bunch of stuff out there. We're going to teach doctors this. You think that's a great idea. But what happened is some of these front groups were hired to come after me. But what they didn't do is they didn't come after the message. And that's one thing I want to point out. And I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Is they never went after the message. They went after the messenger. And so they're like, oh, this guy's not a medical doctor. Look, he's made these different mistakes in his life that is unrelated to this, but it doesn't matter. He's a bad guy. Don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. Never talking about the message. And my request to people and to help you, is it a front group or not, are they attacking the message or the messenger? Because there are some good groups out there saying, look, we really want to inform people about red dye 3, about aspartame and sucralose, and yet you have these front groups attacking it. And I think you alluded to it, but now they're actually buying off influencers and some respected PhD nutritionists in our world that I'm like, I love following some of these people and getting some good information. They're looking at the same research I am and they have a great take on it. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, these guys are saying, oh, by the way, aspartame isn't that bad. Diet Coke is fine for you. Sucralose really is not research. I'm like, you know better. You're a researcher. This is bad. What in the heck's going on? Come to find out, some of the whistleblowers that they're being paid to say those things, but not directly. They're doing it, just like you said, through other means. They're paying these people to come speak and paying exorbitant amounts and things like that. So my take on it is, look at if they're coming after the message, and then I'm all for looking at the research and seeing if that's the case. Like for us to say whole food vitamins are healthy and synthetic or not, let's talk about it in the research. But if second they start talking the messenger, I think you were on a podcast with the food babe not too long ago, and I remember I think you drilled her on this question, and she got heated in an awesome way, saying they come after me, that type thing. And what have you seen? Is that the same thing that you believe or you've seen with a lot of these groups?
Yeah, there's a couple different things that they do. So they will attack the messenger, like you speak of, especially if the messenger isn't somebody from a medical background like the food babe, right? And I brought that up because I've seen her being attacked a lot for over the years and decades that she's been doing this advocacy work. And as a journalist myself, I have to, these are questions that I should ask them to say, hey, how would you respond to something like this? And I thought she did a very good job in
Yeah,
outlining
for sure.
exactly the techniques that the front group used. So that's one way that you're talking about. The other is then now that I think there's a movement of more and more, I think, accredited or people with a scientific background, people like Casey Means, you can't argue that she doesn't know what she's talking about in terms of food and energy and these types of things. Then they'll start to, what I've seen is to pay off. And so they've been doing this here for the studies. Then they'll try to influence the academic institutions and actually put large sums of money in these institutions. Like, for example, the obesity clinic at Harvard and MIT they're funded. It's funded entirely, or not. I wouldn't say entirely, but $15 million roughly came from Novo Nordisk. So if you have pharmaceutical companies that their primary drug is, a drug to combat obesity, what do you think the results of this clinic is going to be in terms of what the solution for obesity is? Is it going to be more natural and more things that you could do on your own that has to do with diet and exercise? Or is it gonna be, "Well, let's take a drug because
Right.
that works." And so then I'm glad that there's a movement because there's more and more doctors kinda speaking out against this and saying, "Hey, no,
Mhm.
I went to, medicals just like you, but here's the problems with medical school." So I think we are coming to a head with this kind of battle between establishment science and you would call more the renegades out there, especially now it's forcing the issue. I'm very keen to hear, for example, RFK Jr.'s HHS confirmation hearing to see what kind of dialogue comes out of that, because now you force this into the public sphere where a lot of these issues are coming to the forefront now. Where you were speaking of fluoride, right? Many years we've talked about fluoride and most of the mainstream and establishment perspective is that, fluoride is good and if there's no problems, no health effects. But now I just saw, even CNN the other day say, well, it looks like there's some issues with fluoride. They didn't go all the way there, but they said, hey, this is something that we might want to look into. And the thing about fluoride is not all countries and not all communities and states do it. So there should be
Right.
debate. And I think this is the hope. And I'm very optimistic in this space is that I'm seeing more and more debate and a return to what I would call, the gold standard of science, which is you put forward a hypothesis, you test that hypothesis, then you make a conclusion versus starting and arriving at that conclusion first and then working your way back to say, okay, how do
Backwards.
to bring up a very controversial topic, right? If you're talking about, okay, if our goal is to get everybody to take a vaccine, how do we work backwards to design a study that would make people take the vaccine? And then anybody that rejects or even anybody who's sort of pro-vaccine but even just questions it is kind of outcasted as a Nazi, so to speak, right? This is where they kind of
Yeah,
weaponize some of
absolutely.
these terms.
Right.
And to share a little story, when I was working in as a consultant for big pharma, there was a situation where I saw some non-scientific, potentially non-scientific. I have to get kind of careful talking about this, but essentially there's a product that we all had to take back in 3 or 4 years ago,
Uh-huh.
and so I was a supply chain guy, so I worked on mapping out the inventory for this particular product, and our team made the conclusion, right? We made a nice PowerPoint slide and just some looked at where all the inventory sat and if there were sales against it, not against it. We basically did a forward projection till the end of the year, and we found hundreds of millions of dollars of inventory of this product that was not going to be sold, that didn't have any demand against it. Turned that report in, and a couple of weeks later, the CEO of this company goes on to national television and said, "Well, we need to now do another dose of this particular drug." Obviously, I'm being obtuse talking about this because I'm under NDA, but I think you know what I'm talking about. And that's when I knew, wow, some of this stuff, I don't know exactly what happened. They maybe already knew about this, but seems like sort of non-scientific what's going on here. Because I was, at the start of the pandemic, you could call me, I was for the vaccine, I took it, and then I was working on it internally, and I saw some of these things come out, and I said, well, this isn't scientific at all. And I think the hope and that I have a lot of optimism is that I think we might be in a place where the public is accepting that return to science, which I see as a very good thing.
Yeah, and what's crazy is you almost wonder if it would take something like COVID and everything that happened for us to be at this place now,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And you can look at, it's always looking at things as what good comes out of this event, right? And this is one of the good things I think that's come out of that because like you, I have, I'm not a vaccine guy. I'm probably called an anti-vaxxer, from the beginning, none of my kids, all that type stuff. So it's easy for me to make the choice I did. But we have a lot of friends, a lot of even doctors that said, man, I feel that what I'm being told is what I should do.
Well, even one of our kids.
Yeah. And so they, take the vaccine. And now coming back, a lot of them that actually, like research like us saying, oh, holy cow, I think I made a huge mistake. What can I do to, encourage my body to, handle this situation? And it was one of the biggest dupes, the biggest frauds on America. And we can say that now, especially with the research that just came out, right? The long-term study that was done with children and that with the vaccine. So I'm not like I'm even saying from an opinion standpoint, but that's the type of stuff that I agree with you. I think we're coming to an age that is a wake-up call. And it's not like we want to go out and stop all these things. We just want informed consent. I'm all fine for them coming out with the vaccine, but there should be a true informative campaign that's honest and true. And that's one of the things about RFK is everyone, oh, he's anti, measles, he's anti this and all that. We hear him, right? We've heard him speak, and we know that's not true. He's about informed consent, and that's why I think it's going to be great for him to be there, and it being a nonpartisan, issue because of where he comes from and his family. But I love that, and I think that's a great way to kind of end today. And I really hope that we can, have you come back again, because there's so many issues here that you've done some great research on. But for today, just to kind of like look, there are large companies in the health space that are using tactics that might not be bad in other spaces. They're just trying to make as much money as they can, and that's awesome. Keep you in the world. You sell Legos, sell more Legos. Try to keep them in buying the Legos, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually great. Capitalism. That's one thing about America. But when you have that same philosophy in the health field and you sell no matter what, and there are things that are being sold and pushed on you that you feel is healthy when they are not. That's where the line has got to be drawn. And we do have to have legislation, at least from an informed position, so that we can make the best decision for ourselves and our families. So we don't come back years later and say, man, I got duped.
Right.
I wish I wouldn't have done X, taken that red dye, taken that vax, taken that whatever it is, right? So I think that I'm very optimistic also for this year and what's happening. So, it's people like you that you're very humble, and I think even being more direct would be a good thing. But I appreciate your position. But people like you is what is needed right now to like dig deeper, because everyone does have jobs, and to say, here's what I found. I'm not for or against, but here's what I found, to give you some information so that you can better make a decision on whether you support these companies, right? Like the Nestle situation and all that, whatever it might be, or not. And I think that the more people that are out there like you, the Food Babe and others, hopefully us, because of our fight against the great American food fraud, that we can help with this movement and return, as you said, to the golden age.
Yeah.
Yeah,
2020.
appreciate you.
Yeah, I was gonna
Go
say
ahead.
2025 is gonna be the year of transparency. I think I'm labeling it that. So
Boom.
okay.
You heard it here first.
I think
Well,
every 2025, 20 it should be every year should be the year of transparency. I think that
Ooh,
that's,
mhm.
Doug and Hillary, that's the stuff that I love from what you guys do, right? Because a lot of times I don't, a lot of what I love is I will talk to anybody who is really honest about what they do and they're transparent about their intentions, even if I don't really agree with them, and that's totally fine. But it's about that disclosure to say, hey, this is my perspective. This is where my bias is coming from. Because I always, I mean, I tell people I'm people say that I'm unbiased, but I'm really not, right? I'm biased against telling what the truth that's going on, and I'm biased, for people, right? I always try to advocate on behalf of people
yeah,
versus, the corporations, because there are, there's all kinds of ways to spin things on behalf of, corporate profits and all that kind of stuff. But the problem with, news and journalism is they pretend to be unbiased while, everybody has a bias. And if we get started to the point of, hey, we're all biased, we all have these things, but I'm going to disclose that for you, and then
I love
give
that.
out the information without forcing people, without then shutting down. That's one of the big things that I just want to get in there, is that it's all about shutting. It seems like there's a lot of just trying to shut down conversation versus, hey, if this is an important issue, we should be able to have a debate about it, right? There,
Yeah,
it seems like they're so scared of the debate because they might be wrong. And this is, back to RFK being sort of really on the forefront of thinking about this. I saw a clip of him, and he was talking, made an analogy with the vaccine program with the Catholic Church, right? With the Catholic Church had that scandal a number of years ago with, children being molested, horrible stuff. And he was saying, there was a lot of movement within the Catholic Church saying we have to squash this, because they saw the Catholic Church as more important to save versus the lives of these children, right? Because then that's kind of what's happening with the vaccine program. You're saying, hey, the vaccine program is more important than some of these kids that might be harmed. So we can't have any conversations about it at all. Versus saying, hey, we should demand transparency. We should demand accountability, right? Why if the product is so good, why do they need the protection, the liability protection that they have, right? That doesn't make any logical sense. So I'm hoping that more and more people, which I think is happening, is more open to that conversation, not saying, hey, anybody who's against vaccines or anybody who is talking about, let's say, other issues are racist and Nazis and this kind of thing, because that's what's used to shut down debate across all issues, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
and that's kind of, I think reasonable discussion hopefully is back. This is for me 2025. I hope it's the year of just open and reasonable discussion. That's what I'm hoping for.
Well, we'd love to get that.
Nice. That would be nice. And I do love everybody coming into this space and having different backgrounds. I think that's really great. I think you give a perspective that some of us couldn't give, from your background. So I think being able to, open up our eyes to all of this, the same talk, but from different perspectives and different backgrounds is huge. So
Yeah, and from my standpoint, for like our company, we own a company called Optimal Health Systems. We here in this facility formulate and make whole food vitamins that we sell to the public and to doctors to help with patients. And so it's that same thing like with food bank. Oh no, they just want to sell their supplements and they're using this platform. And I really love that conversation because it's like we have an acronym. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, James. We have an acronym called FITNESS, and the F.I.T.N.E.S. focus, intense thought. First thing in the world you need to get is your mind straight, your why. Then the N, nutrition, you need to eat healthier, whole foods, stay away from the dyes and those things. E is exercise, you need movement. And then last, you should look at supplementation and specific supplementation, SS of fitness, and should do it based on blood work. See what you're deficient in, take it. If it works, you'll see it in the blood work. You don't have to trust us, that type of stuff. And so even though we sell supplements and that's how we make our living, right? The truth is we're in the health space. And the only way to hold to that moral code that we're asking everyone else to is to be truthful. And the truth is we should be last. You really, really need the mindset, nutrition, and exercise. And then we'll help you with that last part that will give you great benefit. And the more people can be truthful about that in each space, it doesn't hurt ourselves, right? It actually, I hope, helps it because people will say, oh, got it. They sell supplements, but they are here teaching, these things for lifestyle that are most important. And then they try the best to make the very best of supplements they can based on these principles that they follow. And man, if we can be even the start of that movement this year and have those benefits that everyone can do that, I think we'll be in great shape. And we, again, thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you guys. Yeah, no, thank you guys for what you do and having a podcast because I know you don't need to do the podcast, right? You guys are out there, bodybuilding, you're selling the supplements, but this is the part where, you're doing that extra bit to inform people and that's so important, especially in an ecosystem where, there's just so much money flowing around in terms of the media and trying to control narratives and things like that to have just regular, I would say regular citizens putting out content. And I would just, this is why there are certain platforms that the government doesn't want people to have because, there's too much access to information and this and that, which is crazy, right? We should be encouraging information flow, getting it back and forth so we can have a strong and informed population.
Absolutely. Well, we hope that we'll be able to have you back again.
Yeah.
For those watching, please put in the comments what you think of this podcast. This is the beginning of what we want to do a lot more this year. We bring in experts on like James. And so let us know your thoughts on it. As always, this is Miss Natural Olympia Hillary.
And this is Doug the Formulator.
And James Lee. Thank you so much for your investigative journalism and everything you do.
Yeah. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you, Doug, for having me on. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you.